another step beyond the box of like, this is what the kind of activist I am, this is the kind of work I do. They were pushing the envelope for me. They were saying, here's a communique on this action we did at Nike. We're the ELF, but we're doing an action at Nike because of the sweatshop. Like, I'd be okay. Now I got to speak about that because that's the role that I'm in right now. I need to educate myself on that, and I feel to bring that argument forward. This isn't just about saving trees anymore. This is getting bigger and bigger, and a lot of the communiques touched on capitalism as a problem, and so I had to deal with that, and I was excited because that's what I was believing anyway. I was right on with all those issues anyway, so it was a good thing. But it was a way to again take another step beyond single issue activism to start to act on a larger movement. Some people from past movements reached out to us, which was, I could not explain how important it is when somebody who's been involved in a really influential movement steps into a younger movement and lends some support, credibility. And there were a couple people in general, Ramona Africa, the MOVE organization, thank you, 10 minutes left, came and really opened her resources to us and really showed solidarity and support for what we were doing. And I noticed, like, at the end of her speeches around that time, she would always say, "Long live the ALF, long live the ELF," and I believe she still does that. And that was a really important thing to us at the time because it was sympathy and support from an older movement that wasn't related directly to what we were doing, but it was recognizing the connectivity, the generational progression of the struggle. And so the same thing. One time, Ward Churchill of American Indian Movement came out to a big conference we were having, and it's the biggest environmental conference that happens in the U.S. And he gets paid a decent amount for what he does, and he could have stayed anywhere at a 5-star hotel. He could have hung out with any one of the organizers or anybody. He immediately wanted to go straight to the ELF press office and to quote Eugene Anarchist. He wanted to meet the people who were pushing the movement forward at the edge, and so at the forefront. And so it was. Again, it was another situation where it was really inspiring to see, okay, here's somebody who's gone through all this stuff. He wrote the book on COINTELPRO and on the FBI's investigation into radical activism in the 60s. And here he is recognizing the work we do and helping and offering resources and reaching out and taking us under his wing to an extent that was really important. We started, in particular, I started, we didn't really know what we were doing. It was like a lot of pressure, a lot of stress. It's very dangerous. We thought we were always going to end up in prison. And we're always trying to figure out ways to do a better job of what we were doing, even though we had no training. At that time, I had no degree or anything. And so I started researching the Weather Underground because someone woke me up to what they did. And if you don't know, they were a group in the 60s that was largely against Vietnam, but they were, in a bigger extent, they were forward revolution. They were a revolutionary organization. And they did a number of high-profile sort of armed propaganda attacks where they would do nonviolent bombings of, say, the U.S. Capitol or the Pentagon to draw attention to the anti-war effort or whatever, police stations to draw attention to the murder of Fred Hampton, stuff like that. So they would put they'd blow up a bathroom with no one in it and no one would get hurt, and they'd do a big press release. They were an underground group. Probably a lot of people here know about them. So anyway, they were an example of a group that was doing something similar to what we had going on. And they had a group called the Prairie Fire Organizing Committee that was an above-ground group that was sort of doing what we were doing with the press office. They were creating above-ground support, they were putting out pamphlets, they were talking to the press when the underground people couldn't talk to them. So I started researching all that and learning about that. Again, taking another step further outside of this box that I first identified with as my reason for being an activist. I also was invited to do a lot of talks, and again, I was not trained. We had no speech classes or anything. I basically got put in this position because of because I was willing to get arrested and speak out, not because I was necessarily a good speaker or anything. So I started doing research on people who I'd known that had done political speeches in the past, and I started reading Malcolm X's speeches, which totally blew me away. I mean, I had this assumption of what they say Malcolm X is and who they say Malcolm X is, and I thought, okay, this guy isn't really what I'm into. I couldn't have been more wrong. His speeches were so powerful, he was so on point, and the more I learned about him, the more inspiring that whole situation was for me. So I totally dove into that, spent way too much money on all these out-of-print old publications that, wrote up the text of his speeches and got way into that. And et cetera, et cetera. Then I got into an undergraduate and then a graduate program, studying past social justice struggles, studying the Panthers and all kinds of movements, and learning as much as I can. really like expanding my horizons, somewhat out of necessity and somewhat out of that's what I was always into in the first place and just didn't know how to plug into it. Then something called Operation Backfire happened, which was the beginning of the FBI's major, the one FBI investigation that actually did have some success against the ELF was called Operation Backfire, and it was very encompassing, and even before people knew what it was called, you felt it in the movement. People started disappearing out of sort of radical enclaves and dispersing to different areas and kind of like being quiet, you couldn't find people, and it felt like everyone was under attack and everyone was afraid. And I felt very much under attack and very, very much afraid. I got 2 FBI raids during the press office on my home vehicle in the workplace, 5 months. Hopefully I can do that. And I had numerous interactions where the FBI and the ATF and the US Marshals, etc. were telling me that I was going to spend the rest of my life in prison because of the speaking out I was doing in support of this group that was, at the time was considered the #1 domestic terrorist threat in the United States. They made many public statements to that effect. And it was scary, and we felt like we were weak and on the run at that point, and I was scared. All of a sudden, and I also moved back to New York at that point, where I'm from, Buffalo, and so I felt like I started recognizing that I had something in common with a lot of these past movements, unfortunately, and that was repression. A lot of these past movements that were successful faced intense repression. And now my movement that I was coming from was facing some pretty intense repression. As Operation Backfire moved on and actually identified some people that were involved in some of these actions and put them in prison and charged them with 335 years plus life for nonviolent property destruction, we started to have another thing in common with these past movements, and that was prison. Also, relocating back to Buffalo helped me out a lot because when I would plug into activism in my area, there was a deeper rooting of the old struggle for black liberation especially. And in upstate New York, in our prison system here, we have a number of black liberation freedom fighters that are still in prison. So if I started, now I'm dealing with political prisoner issues because my friends are political prisoners, because I'm afraid I'm going to become a political prisoner. And so to get involved in that, I'm getting involved in political prisoner support for David Gilbert, who was a underground member who stayed underground after they emerged and got involved in the black liberation struggle. I'm doing political prisoner support for Robert Seth Hayes, who is another black liberation political prisoner living very close to me, and we do weekly visits with him in a maximum state prison near my house. And Jalil Mutakim, another one, and Herman Bell, both of them also Black Liberation Army members who are still in prison to this day from the 1970s. So all these things I'm trying to say represent steps outside of the box that I first got me involved in this movement. And my talk is supposed to be about beyond intersectionality towards a revolutionary freedom struggle. It's kind of hard for me to talk about because I always kind of viewed what I was doing as working towards a revolutionary freedom struggle. I never wanted to be trapped in an animal rights or an environmental background. I wanted to sort of branch out. I just couldn't find ways. I was grasping for ways all along. And I know that that's not where everyone is coming from. But I think it's an important thing to think about that I had to take a step back from what I was doing. I had to take a step back from my sort of idea of how to be an activist and what to do. With the animal liberation movement, they have this pre-packaged way to do everything. You've got to be a vegan, you got to do this, you buy this, you don't buy that. It's very pre-packaged, way more so than any other movement. You don't have a dietary restriction to join any other movement. You don't have a commitment that you make that is daily, many times a day, over and over. You have to make this commitment when you eat something that reflects your politics in any other movement right now except for the animal liberation movement. And that's good in a lot of ways, right? Because it creates a commitment, a level of commitment that's required. And I think that's a good thing. People are required to make an ongoing commitment to the struggle, but there's negative parts to it as well. And that, especially in that it excludes other people. It creates a sense that there's a club that you have to do something to get in, and if you're not that, then you're not really in, and they don't respect you. It creates a barrier that a lot of us, including myself, didn't realize for a long time. And not to say that